Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Frogs Insider Podcast, brought to you by the Flying T Club and the fine folks at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. I am super excited to be here for two reasons. Number one, I get to talk to one of my favorite sports journalists and personalities, Jessica Smetana, and also because we're here to talk about the Sweet 16. And I can say in full honesty, no TCU beat reporter, journalist, anyone that covers the team has ever talked about a Sweet 16 involving TCU on the men's or women's side. So this is a doubly exciting moment for me as we get ready to prepare for TCU and Notre Dame part 2, exactly 4 months to the day of part 1, but this one with a little bit few more stakes attached to it. Jessica, I really appreciate you taking some time and being willing to talk Irish Horned Frogs part 2 with me.
So this is the first TCU Sweet 16 in men's or women's basketball?
It has never happened.
I didn't know
history.
that. I thought there may have been one at some point somewhere. I didn't know it was the first one ever.
Listen, Jessica, if I want to get a ton of clicks here, I will pivot to talking about the men and the fact that they've never made a Sweet 16 and the fact that Jamie Dixon is in year 10 and TCU did not make the tournament. But that's not what we're here for. We're not going to dwell on the negatives and the lack of positivity or whatever the boys are doing over there. We are here to celebrate women's sports and women's athletics and the women's tournament, which once again has proven that it is not just a singular person that drives this bus, but that there's great basketball happening literally all across the country.
Yeah, I actually think this TCU Notre Dame matchup might be the best with Sweet 16 game this weekend. And I'm coming with a heavy bias as a Notre Dame grad. But the fact that, I mean, there's a lot of rematches this weekend, like LSU and NC State and North Carolina and Duke. But the fact that these two teams played in November and have sort of similar, like, storylines and stakes attached to them, like both have like sort of prolific guards and both have bigs. One is like at the end of her long career, one is just beginning as a freshman and like getting a redemption arc chance. Like it is a really interesting matchup to me.
Yeah, and I guess we could start with the guard play because that is kind of where the superstars come from. Obviously, Notre Dame has, I would say, almost inarguably the best backcourt in college basketball and one of the probably all-time greats when you look at, obviously, Hannah Hidalgo, who's a finalist for the Naismith Player of the Year award. Kind of beat out Haley Van Lith for that Final Four spot, I would imagine. And then you also have Sonia Citron, who has just been an absolute revelation and doesn't get nearly the attention as her two counterparts do. And then Olivia Miles, who had a little bit of a scare last week with the ankle injury, but did not seem to be too bothered by it as Notre Dame won to advance to the Sweet 16. What is it about that group of players that not just makes them so successful, but it allows them to be able to play together?
Yeah, it's like you said, I think it's probably the best backcourt in the country when it's working well. And the last two games, the first and second round of the NCAA tournament, that backcourt was really on fire, even with Olivia Miles having the ankle scare and then having she woke up the morning of the second round game and said that she was only at like 50% and wasn't sure if she was going to play. She had a great game on Sunday too against Michigan. The thing about all three of them is that they're all so different. Like Hannah is the player who's going to she's going to handle the ball. She's going to steal a lot on defense. Like she'll get in there and like poke the ball out of your hands. She's averaging like 4 steals a game. She can shoot the three. She can shoot the mid range. She can drive into the paint. Like she can do a lot of stuff. Olivia is the one that's going to be handling the ball a lot too, but she's going to be like making the most absurd passes you've ever seen in your life. And I actually like really have a newfound appreciation for her now that I got to see her play in person this season because my boyfriend and I live in Miami and they were in Miami to play against the Hurricanes, and watching her do these weird like no look passes and like behind the head passes and things like that, you just don't really get to appreciate it as much when you're watching it on TV. And so we're watching her and we're like, that was like the craziest thing we've ever seen. She'll like do these weird passes where she'll like put backspin on the ball and like do a bounce pass with backspin. She's probably going to be a WNBA lottery pick this year. I think she's probably going to enter the WNBA draft, although she hasn't officially announced it yet. And then, like you said, Sonia Citron, sort of the underrated player of the three, although she's been so good, especially the last stretch of the season. She's a player that like Notre Dame fans are just going to be so sad when she's gone. She's so solid. She can shoot the three ball really well. And I think the offense really works best when she's getting a lot of touches. And if she's shooting really well early and heating up, that's a player that, you know, she's great on defense, like probably the best man defender on the team, but she can really do a lot of damage offensively too. And I think in an underrated way.
And she's got a lot of size too at 6'1", which is a tough matchup for the Horned Frogs because their guards aren't exactly giants in the backcourt. Haley plays like she's 6'3", but in reality is very generously listed at 5'9". So I think that how they defend Madison Connor, Haley Van Lith, and Donovan Hunter is going to be really interesting. You've gotten to watch a lot of Notre Dame basketball. I'm going to guess most TCU fans probably haven't seen much since the Cayman Islands, and we couldn't watch it because it was on some
yeah, right.
like making like Bally Sports and Flow Sports look accessible, whatever channel this thing was on. But what can we expect to see a little bit from the Notre Dame defense? We've seen a lot of teams come at TCU, especially down the stretch with trapping and trying to trap the high pick and roll to take away the connection that Haley and Sedona Prince have. Do you think they're going to play a little bit more straight up, or do you think we'll see some kind of junk defense and some different things?
I'm not exactly sure what to expect because this team's a little bit different than the first time these two teams played against each other. There are two players that are back for Notre Dame that were out with injuries the first matchup, which I think made freshman Kate Koval's life a lot harder. She was the one sort of primarily going, toe-to-toe with Sedona Prince, like the biggest player on Notre Dame's team, but a true freshman. Like that was only like maybe her fifth game in college. I can't remember which game of the season it was, but it was early in her college career. And she's someone who's like, I think going to be a great player and was like a super highly rated prospect. I think the number one in her position last year coming into college. So I have like very, high hopes for her, but it's hard coming in as a freshman and defending against someone that's been playing for a really long time. That's also bigger than you.
6'7" and 30 years old. It's fine.
Exactly. But Maddie Westbeld is back for Notre Dame. She was out for the first half or so of the season. She is a very experienced player and a really good defender. I think she was just playing better last season than she has been coming back from this injury, but she's someone that's played in the NCAA tournament, multiple times and is like a very solid player for Notre Dame and someone that can obviously, help out with the load there. Same with Liza Carlin, who is a transfer from Marquette. That's another big that will surely get some more minutes. She didn't play in the first matchup either. So I'm curious to see how it goes. I think Sonia Citron guarded Haley Van Lith the first time around. It'll be interesting to see if they sort of switch that up and if Hannah Hidalgo is the primary defender this time around and Sonia goes on Connor and they try to sort of shut down the perimeter more. I don't really know what to expect, but I do know that defense has been a huge area of emphasis as the season has progressed. Notre Dame, obviously went from the number one ranked team in the country with 5 or so games left to a 3 seed in the tournament. And a big reason for that slump was they just weren't shooting well the last few games of the season. Granted, against great competition, all of their losses came against like top 15 teams. But the other thing was their defense just like wasn't as intense as it had been earlier in the season. So I would expect them to come out with some pretty high intensity on defense. And that will their philosophy is sort of like get the defensive work done. And that will help transition onto offense and get players open and make shots.
Yeah, I think that's something that both of these teams are really underappreciated for how well they play defense. I mean, TCU had Louisville in hell in the second quarter, like a 17-0 run when they went from being down 17-14 to having a 20-plus point lead at the half. And I think that's going to be the fascinating matchup is which team can get the offense going quickly enough, but play the defense that's going to lead to those easy transition opportunities. TCU had to come from behind big in that first matchup, but that was also a team that was really one of their first couple of games playing together. And I don't think at this point in the season, TCU can count on being able to come back from down double digits against Notre Dame the way that they played the last 2 weeks or last 2 games.
Yeah, that's the other thing that was sort of interesting about the first matchup. Like I was watching the game cast because like you said, it was pretty hard to find those Cayman Island games, but Notre Dame had I want to say like an 8-point lead going into the fourth quarter. And then they totally ran out of gas. And then they lost their next game too against Utah. And that point in the season when you only have 6 players, in your rotation because there's so many players out with injury, it's obviously, not ideal. Obviously TCU is also very talented and good. I'm not, not giving Notre Dame an excuse there, but Notre Dame did play really well throughout the first 3 quarters and then things sort of fell off like it did honestly this latter half of the season for Notre Dame, kind of running out of gas towards the finish line of the regular season in the ACC tournament.
Do you think that was just kind of just to be in the end of the season, you've got a veteran team, they've played a lot, this kind of let off the gas. Is that something that you're worried about, or with the long break between games at this point, does it really matter?
I think the long break between games is so huge for the major conferences in women's basketball. Having like the coaches all talk about it too, having like those 2 weeks to just like really reset, especially because the first week, especially you lose your conference tournament, you get like a full week before selection Sunday. You don't even know who you're going to play against. So it's not like you can sit in the film room all day and like prep for the next team. You're sort of just taking a little bit of a break. And I read an interview that Notre Dame beat reporter Eric Hansen did with Muffet McGraw about like what that time period means. And it is really important for the players. Like it's a long season. You're in class, like you've got like these midweek ACC games where you're traveling all across the country now. And especially the way Notre Dame's back half of their season was stacked with like ranked team after a stretch where they weren't really playing a lot of ranked teams back to back. Not a great like schedule and just a long season. And so after the break, I would say during the break, a lot of Notre Dame fans were like, "Oh, this is like doesn't look good. It doesn't feel good. This team looks broken. Like they should not have lost to Florida State. They probably should have beaten Duke." But after seeing the first 2 games in the NCAA tournament, the return to like the intense, like really aggressive style of defense, like watching Hannah Hidalgo get all her steals and watching the team just shoot better. Liatu King, who we haven't even mentioned, is also another underrated player in this tournament for Notre Dame. She was a portal pickup. She had a perfect game against Michigan. She was like 7 for 7 from the field. Just a really, I think 15 rebounds or something crazy. Like she's super underrated. She's averaging a double-double per game. So another player that's like really helpful to Notre Dame to have now. And yeah, so I think maybe fans were worried at the end of the season, like this doesn't look right. But now that the tournament has started and they look like they did in the middle part of the season, the beginning of the season, when they beat UConn and USC and Texas, I think, some of the worries have been a little bit squashed. But then again, now comes your hardest competition yet. You have to play TCU. If they do win, like you have to play Texas again. Like they beat Texas in double overtime back in November, but that's a 1 seed obviously. So it's not easy to win in the tournament, but certainly the first 2 rounds going the way they did helped.
You kind of jumped on my next question a little bit in a great way because you're a professional. This is what you do, right? The segues are just natural. But you mentioned Liatu King. Relatable. But TCU saw kind of a similar performance from Donovan Hunter, their point guard. She's the youngest player on the team. She started as a true freshman for Oregon State a season ago and made the Elite Eight with that program before they lost their Pac-12 membership. Rest in peace. And she came over to TCU. So is there like a player maybe that we haven't mentioned, or maybe you want to just talk about Liatu King again, but that you think could step up, that could be a difference maker outside of those superstar names that exist up and down that roster?
Yeah, I think that would definitely be Liatu King. She's just super solid. Like she's been a player who's just quietly, averaging 11 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, shooting 55% from the field this whole season. And this is her first NCAA tournament. As Pam Ward not so gently told Notre Dame fans during the Stephen F. Austin game, she was like, "This is Liatu King's first tournament game," because she played at Pitt. It was like, oh no. But she's just really like I said, just like quietly, just like so solid, and has been really just a great addition for Neil Ivey and for this team.
Yeah, I think that she could really be the problem defensively, because when you look at how TCU likes to play, they generally start small, and you've got probably Agnes Emanopu is going to have to match up with her early on. And Agnes has a great wingspan that's probably well over 6 feet. But is not the tallest player on the court. So I think that'll be a really thing to watch. Agnes is also an exceptional rebounder from kind of that guard forward position. So watching those two battle for those rebounds, I think could be one of the underrated points. Like if you want to get into like the weeds of basketball, that's probably the area to watch. But it's going to be really hard for people to take their eyes off of Hannah Hidalgo and Haley Van Lith, I think, because I have a feeling both of those two will be very geared up to put on a show.
They're both so competitive. Like and Haley Van Lith has a long history playing against Notre Dame. Obviously, when she was at Louisville, there's a rivalry there between Notre Dame and Louisville in the ACC. And I watched Haley Van Lith play, for Team USA and 3x3. Like she's such a competitor. She really wants to win. And like, I'm so happy for the season that she's had this year after last year. A lot of people were so critical of her defense in the tournament, and it just felt like such a crappy way for her, like, season to end, especially because like she's a player I had been watching for a while. So it's been nice to see her become, Big 12 player of the year and like lead this team to its first Sweet 16 ever, which I just learned. But Hannah is the same way. Hannah is, I would describe her as like annoying. Like the way that she plays defense is super annoying. One of the things that she's gotten better at, I think, is picking her spots when she's going to try to make a steal, when she's going to try to make a play on defense. I think she can get like really eager to do that sometimes. And now I think she's kind of like matured into the position more. And she's like, this is when I should do this. This is when maybe it's not worth it. But when she does, fast break, she's down the court before you can even blink. And again, it's just like, I would be so annoyed if I had to play against her.
Yeah, I have a feeling I'm going to be very annoyed by her Saturday afternoon, and I'll be in a photo spot, so I'll have an up-close and personal view of her being annoying back. You brought up Hailey Van Lith and her competitiveness, and it's something that I think anybody that's followed her career has been really aware of. Anybody that's listened to her press conferences this year, that's listened to Coach Campbell talk about her. He said today in media availabilities, the every fiber of her body is committed to winning. And we saw, we talked about a couple of viral clips before we started recording. We talked about the Sedona dancing clip, and we're going to let that one leave. We're just going to leave that one off to the side. We're not going to deal with that. But then we also talked about the clip. I had an opportunity to talk to Hailey in the post-game locker room. And asked her a couple questions about, we've seen her break down on the podium multiple times this year with the emotion. And so just kind of asking her why has that emotion been so prevalent throughout this season, while we've seen her also play with such joy. And it kind of brought to light just the pressure that these athletes are under. I mean, you mentioned the viral moment. Anybody that follows women's basketball saw the shrug with Caitlin Clark, hitting from 50 feet or something behind her. She's been exposed through the Olympics and just being a kid that's portaled twice. You experienced some of that, obviously, too, in your role. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about the pressure of being in the spotlight like that, and you've been in the spotlight from a young age as well, and what kind of toll that can take when you know what people are saying, even if you try to block out the noise?
Yeah, I mean, it's super like disturbing to read weird stuff about you on the internet. Obviously, like if you're an athlete or even, someone like me who's just on a well listened to podcast, like you try to ignore it. You don't like look for it, although I think some people do, and maybe like compulsively just to see what people are saying. I try to like stay away from it, but you still, it finds you sometimes. I think like the thing that I remind myself of sometimes is that me being on the show that I'm on as the only full-time woman member of that show, it pisses off so many people. And I kind of think that that's funny. And whenever I'm like, oh my God, like for lack of a better term, like this is a sausage fest. And like, this is like, it just is like, this is too much. I just remind myself that like me being there to break up the party is really pissing someone off somewhere. And that can kind of be nice too. And in the same way for a lot of like women playing sports these days, a lot of people don't want to see women play sports. A lot of people are trying to downplay the impact that women's sports have in culture and in our conversations and in our lives, and try to say like, no one watches that. Like that's the most common thing you hear when you talk about any women's sports, right? It's like, no one watches that. It's like, actually, I do. My friends do. All the people that I talk to in my community do. And the fact that it really pisses you off that happens is like, it's kind of funny. Like you should probably deal with that on your own, because it's not really my problem that upsets you so much.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend, and I was talking about Hailey Van Lith, and he's like, I don't know who that is. And I was like, that's more of a you thing.
You must live under a rock.
Yeah,
like, I'm
like
sorry.
A college wrestling fan. Like,
oh, God.
You want to talk about we don't know what you're talking about. Come on, man.
If you follow any college athletics, like, I'm sorry. The women's basketball players, it's been said over and over again this year, and I think that it's so true. They're more recognizable coming into this NCAA tournament. The average person off the street can name more women's college basketball players than men's college basketball players right now. And part of the reason is that women are really good at marketing themselves and lifting up the other players in the sport. And part of it is also that obviously, there's no one and done. Like you have to stay in college for multiple years, and all of those sorts of reasons. But part of it is also that like we're really good at making sure like we talk about the women that we watch play sports, and like we're really good at creating these fandoms, and I think that that's super important and something that like I'm always happy to be a part of.
I think that's a really good point. Is it not just about the women being able to market themselves, but the kind of rising tide lifts all boats?
Yeah.
It's there's still a competitiveness, obviously, and there's a competition for eyeballs, but it does seem that they're more willing to share the wealth, so to speak, than we see on the men's game. I mean, I can name I follow the sport, and I know I can name off the top of my head Cooper Flag, and then
Right.
probably Toppin at Tech, and after that, it gets really difficult to start digging for names.
This is terrible, but I could not tell you the starting five of Notre Dame's men's basketball team. Like Marcus Burton, I know is like the best point guard in the ACC, but like other than that, like they're just not as good, and it's just
Yeah.
so hard. There's so many new players every year. The women's team has just been, especially at Notre Dame, like the women's basketball team for my entire lifetime and the entire time I was a student has been full of stars. Skylar Diggins-Smith was a senior when I was coming into college. Neil Ivey obviously played at Notre Dame, won a national championship. Muffet McGraw is like one of the great Hall of Fame women's basketball coaches in history. And if you watch any WNBA game, it's guard after guard that went to Notre Dame. Jackie Young, Arike Gumbawale, Jewel Lloyd.
Wings.
Yes. It's just like player after player after player, K-Mac, like there's just so many of them. So it's just a really, I think, strong program and something that, you know, luckily I was a part of it when I was there, and now I get to keep being a fan.
Yeah, it's been really fun to watch the TCU fan community go from very early on, like, I'm not going to watch women's sports. I don't care that they're good. Oh, it's not a good brand of basketball, to now the thread on the Horned Frog Blitz message board is thousands of comments long, and people like looking around. There were 7,500 people almost at the stadium on Sunday. It was the biggest crowd ever for a TCU women's basketball game, surpassing the previous biggest crowd, which was when number 2 Baylor and Brittany Griner came to Fort Worth several years ago, a game that they got absolutely smoked in. Because all Baylor did for 35 years was smoke us. Yeah, they beat us for 35 years. We beat them 3 times this year. It was great. But yeah, so it's been fun to kind of see the community buy in and to you know, I took a moment to kind of just like look around the stadium and see all of these men with their daughters and entire families and women and young and old and all ages. And that was one of the things that Haley was asked about post-game, was all of these different types of people wearing her jersey and what it means to kind of transcend women's basketball and just reach sports fans in that way.
Yeah, I think that that's awesome. And I'm, again, like super happy that she's had this season. And I heard, I think it was like Andrea Carter or one of the College Game Day hosts was like, just be as loud when you praise her as you were criticizing her. Unfortunately, that's not really the world we live in. It's way more fun for people to like, you know, crap on players. But
well, and like, I won't even say what it was, but we posted a TikTok clip from the locker room interview with her, and like the search terms, like the search was just so inappropriate. And I'm just like, this is a woman expressing her mental health struggles and really just like speaking and it's about her appearance. And I was like, we're still there. We've got a long way to go. I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but I do want to ask about Nyla Ivey. You've talked about Muffet McGraw, and, you know, following a legend is such a difficult thing to do, but Coach Ivey has done it with such grace and class and has obviously been able to recruit at a high level and win at a high level. How do you see kind of, you know, Mark Campbell's only in his 4th year of being a head coach and only in his 2nd year of being a power conference head coach. Do you think that there's an advantage there with Ivy with their experience and just what she's already been able to accomplish so far in the sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nielle's great. I'm a huge fan of hers. I think even over the 5 years she's been at Notre Dame, like we've seen her kind of grow as a coach, and it's been really cool to see because she is like one of the Notre Dame legends. Like she played for Muffet, won a national championship, was an assistant for years, was an assistant in the NBA for a year, and then came back to Notre Dame to succeed Muffet as the head coach. She's not made it to the Elite 8 yet. And so this is like a sort of like recurring thing. It's like, well, when are they going to make it out of the Sweet 16 round? And to her like defense, right? 3 years ago, Notre Dame was like still kind of rebuilding the program after she took over, but they made it to the Sweet 16. That was a great year. They were 5 seed. 2 years ago, lost their best player like a week before the tournament. I mean, there's not a lot you can do when that happens. they still made it to the Sweet 16, but they couldn't get further. And then last year, made it to the Sweet 16, played against Oregon State, lost in just a weird game. It was the game, I don't know if you remember this, but they made Hannah Hidalgo take her nose ring out like midway through the game.
That's right.
And so she missed a ton of minutes, and there was like no explanation for it. They had to get pliers out and like yank it out of her nose, even though she had worn it the whole season. It was so bizarre. But that being said, it was still a great Oregon State team, and there's remnants of that team all over women's basketball right now.
She'll be back
on like every team.
Again. Yep.
Yeah, including USC and Oklahoma. So Neil Ivey is definitely, I think, a great coach, and I think it would be huge for her to finally get over that Sweet 16 hump. I don't think that it's like, there's totally understandable reasons why it hasn't happened yet, and it's really hard to win once you get to at this point in the tournament, even if you are a really great team. Like again, last year, like lost one of their starters in the ACC tournament also. So this is a year where like the starters are all healthy. The team has 3 excellent guards. Like it's kind of like not really, I wouldn't say it's like an expectation, like you have to make a Final Four, but I would say in like January and February, like that was sort of the expectation. It was like, this team's playing really well and they have beaten Texas, UConn, and USC. Like this should be a Final Four team. So I guess we'll see what happens this weekend, but she, I think, really, really wants this. I know the team really, really wants it. This is definitely the best tournament team they've had of her entire tenure so far. That's not a controversial thing to say at all, given all the health stuff I just listed. But it's a tough draw. TCU is really good. Texas is really good. So if you win on Saturday, like it's not going to get easier from there. But first things first, you got to play the Sweet 16 round and at least get through it one time.
if there's one area that I'm 100% confident and willing to admit that Niall Ivey has a gigantic advantage, it is on sideline fits. Because Mark Campbell, God bless him, that man loves a sweatsuit and he can rock a sweatsuit. But Coach Ivey, she really understands how to bring it when it comes to the sideline fashion.
Yeah, no, she's kicking everyone's ass with sideline
I don't want
fashion.
to hear Kim Mulkey. Like, it's Dawn Staley, it's Niall Ivey, period. That's the list right now, I think.
Yeah.
And the coach from GCU, she was pretty good too. She was pretty good. So it's like 1A, 2A, and then like 1B there. But
Neil's fits are just unbelievable. Yeah. Like she had this like green like snake print silk suit on Sunday, and I was like, what? Like, where is she even? How is she even getting this? This is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
This is how women's sports have made it, is when you're getting dressed and fashioned out by the big designers, because I'm assuming that's what's happening.
I hope so. Yeah,
they are looking at the audience that they have, and they are making the most of it. So I can't thank you enough for taking some time. I literally could do this for another 3 hours, but you work mornings, so I don't want to keep you up too late. We haven't even mentioned where people can find you yet, and that is a very bad professionalism on my part. But please tell people where they can listen, either to hate listen or to enjoy listen. Either way.
I can't say we cover a lot of women's sports on the Dan LeBatard Show.
We don't cover a lot of sports a lot of times.
That's also true. So maybe that's a quality.
If you're into comedy, you are going to know so much about comedians.
There's so many comedians that I have only heard of at my job. But yes, we're on wherever you get your podcasts, and then Peacock, I think, Max, a couple other places. But check out YouTube, the podcast app. YouTube for sure. Yes, definitely YouTube. But yes, please don't make me talk about this anymore, because I'm not a basketball expert. I just pretended like I was one for like 20 minutes. I'm running out of material right now.
Look, you are a professional bullshitter, if that's what it takes, right? Like,
yes,
from one
I
to
agree
the
with
other.
that.
Yeah, but tune in for the F1 minute, because you do knock that out of the park every single time. So again, that. Thank you so much. As I said at the beginning, as a longtime listener of the Dan LeBatard Show, it's the only national podcast I regularly listen to, which is probably terrible for my mental health. But I just appreciate so much just what you bring and the voice that you constantly are trying to give women's sports, and the fact that you keep the you give a little levity to the sausage fest in the shipping container. So I really appreciate what you do and your work, and just awesome for you to come on. And I do think you did a really, really good job of talking about this game. So we'll find out if either of us knew what we were talking about on Saturday. But I think at this point, it was a pretty good show.
Thanks.